Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr,
business consultant.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr Business Consulting.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Dean Jackson said, "Listening is an art that requires attention over talents, spirit over ego, others over self." Well, on today's episode, we talk about the art of active listening, diversity and belonging, caring leadership, and more. My guest is a wife and mother to four, a former attorney, a best-selling author, a two-time TEDx and keynote speaker, an executive coach, a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist, host of the Leadership with Heart podcast, and the world's leading expert on listening at work. Did you hear me? I hope so. A regular contributor to leading news outlets, she's been featured in Fast Company, the Chicago Tribune, Bloomberg Business, and CNN Business, to name just a few. On top of all that, she's a lover of warm chocolate chip cookies. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Employee Fanatix and the woman who's been dubbed the Employee Whisperer, HeatherRYounger. Heather, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Wow, what an introduction. I'm feeling really good about myself right now.
Well,
especially the warm chocolate cookie side. The warm chocolate cookie side is the one thing I'm really feeling good about.
Well, I hope you have a couple with you, because that makes for a great way to start a podcast episode. So let's dive right in. I tell you, first of all, I have thoroughly enjoyed researching you and digging into your world and watching your content, listening to your podcast. And it's really been insightful and inspiring for me. So many new learnings have come out of that research that I've done. So I'm excited to share part of your story and share your insights and your message with our audience. So I thought a good starting point for us would be for you to share with all of us what your favorite trait is about yourself.
I'd probably say the warmness. It goes right along with those chocolate chip cookies. It's the warmth. It's the warmth that people feel when they're around me. I think that's probably the biggest thing, the biggest trait.
Okay, excellent. Well, I sense that through this virtual call. So there is something about you that's magnetic. And again, going back to listening and consuming your content, that is something that resonated with me as well, just as I was doing my research. And is that warmth that you have, that you described as a personality trait, is that something that you feel you've always had? Is it something that you've been intentional about cultivating?
I think like my father had this real like charismatic way about him that brought people in, and I kind of like had that through nurture. But I think the warmth side of me is a very intentional thing that has just become who I am. So I don't even know any other way to show up. And if I show up counter that, I just can't even sleep. And I think it's a byproduct of that backstory of like just not feeling, having people in my life, important people in my life, not make me feel important or valued or listened to, or just there, like human. And so to that extent, it created in me this desire to make sure that no one else felt that way. And so then in my life, I just kind of go about trying to go out of my way to make it those, especially those on the outside. Like I remember in law school, there was this one gentleman, I saw like he was an introvert. He loved reading books, but he'd be like, oh, everybody else would be doing stuff. And he'd be just like on the floor, like reading a book in the hallway. And I'd be like, wait, come here, like, come, like, I want to come here. And even though he had a certain personality, he would come with me because he knew that I actually wanted him there. But normally he would just continue to sit there and read, And so I kind of always gone out of my way to create that for other people, because early on, I had that loss, that kind of void, and wanted to make sure that other people didn't have that same feeling.
Understood. Well, I want to explore that a bit. And, I find that there are moments in life that define us. They change the course of our lives. So, kind of speaking about your backstory, what is one of those moments that you've experienced?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are many and many textures, some that I have revealed in public and some that I haven't. I think the one that most people know about is the story uh, where I come from, basically. My mom is white and Jewish. My dad is Black and Christian. Was Black and Christian. He just passed away last year. And my mom's parents weren't at all happy about that union. And I was literally the black sheep of the family, just kept out of the circle, not allowed to go to weddings, bar mitzvahs, funerals, anything that was publicly seen, because my mom and dad, they kind of eloped and it wasn't approved. And then I was kind of a constant reminder of that. So it just in their mind was like, oh no, that's going to make our outside community not look positively on us because we couldn't kind of stay the course, or our family didn't stay the course. So in that being like an outsider there, not like having pictures on my grandmother's wall, like they were in her bedroom with the door closed, no one ever saw them. That feeling of being that outsider, like not being a person that had value in like a home environment, let's say like with the family, and they were really close. So I'm the only child, so it was kind of it. And so that kind of created that sense of that void of like, gosh, I want to belong to something. Like I want to do that. I remember I used to see my mom's older sister. She had 3 boys, and they were always so close. And during Shabbos, they were always together, and they just all these things together. And I was like, gosh, I want to be in that. I just remembered looking at it, wanting that so much. So it's interesting because as I became and through in my adulthood, I just kind of continued to, I guess, always want to be a part of it. So I went to law school because my grandmother kind of talked me into it, and I wanted to be long, so I wanted to be accepted, so I did that. Graduated in practice for a couple of years, and chose to kind of exit that profession, realizing it wasn't done for me but for someone else. And then later on, much later, so now I have kids. I have 4 children, as you heard, and I'm at like my second child, and I'm like, I want to be a part of a family that has like, that is whole in every way, that has the same belief structure, that walks the same path. And so I made a decision to say, I'm breaking away from that side of the family, that faith, because I was raised as a person looking like me. So you can't see me if you're listening to an audio, but you can go find me. A person looking like me, raised as a Jewish person, and then probably around 30 something, converting to Catholicism. And my whole family is that same faith now.
So what you mentioned your grandmother as an example, and that you went to law school because this is something that you were doing for someone else, trying to belong, trying to find a place. Are there other examples that you can point to of things that you had done or did for others as opposed to yourself because you were looking for that sense of belonging?
Oh my gosh, I think as a teenager, like teenagers do that stuff, period, irrespective if they have belonging issues at home. We just are always like trying to look for the circle, because I think it's an innate in us to want to belong to something bigger than ourselves, to want to have a sense of safety, a safe space, to be ourselves there. And so, it's probably a couple different times as a teenager and a very young adult that I did that in relationships or whatever it was. I do remember interesting in law school, like college, I had like some friends, and in law school too, where people would just like, it would drive me up the wall. I'd be sitting in the student union in college, and I'd hear different people around me, some people in my circle, talking about like Asian people, Hispanic people, and they'd be around me, and I would just be like fuming. And some of them would do it actually and start laughing. They thought it was so hilarious that I got so mad, and they were like, "This doesn't have anything to do with you." I'm like, "It has everything to do with me and you." Because why don't you embrace people who are different from you? And again, so that pain, that kind of edge, that thing that got me boiling was obviously has to do with my backstory, that not everybody experiences that in such a profound way at a young age. And so I think that I would be more I would say probably the advocate. I'm kind of like I've been a voice for those who are unheard or for a very long time. And it was because of that backstory. I always say, like, that backstory drove who I am today. Like, anything you can see as a success point when you look out in the world about me, it came from not just that, but some other examples I don't really share about just some painful experiences. And so I think there's some really good things that can be born out of it, but you got to work through it too. I mean, like, I believe in a good dose of therapy. I believe in you got to work through your stuff, because it comes back and it can haunt you and your family later.
Well, I want to pull on that thread for a moment, because it's a topic that comes up quite a bit in discussion when we realize that in order to make any sort of change happens from within. We can't change someone else, but we can change ourselves. We can influence, but we have to do the work on ourselves. So can you touch on we don't have to go into too much detail, but I would love it if you would at least cover some of the work that you did to work through those challenges that you faced. Maybe give us, you mentioned the word therapy as an example.
Mm-hmm.
What are specific things that you did that our audience can possibly take away from if they're experiencing maybe some similar types of challenges and adversity that they're going through?
Yeah, I mean, I think therapy was a big one, although that wasn't something I started with earlier, partly because there just weren't any resources from it. I didn't come from a house that had a lot of money for that. But I would say reframing, which is something that therapists teach, and I didn't know it. I didn't know that's what I was doing. I just knew I had to get past it all, and that I couldn't let it be the thing that it couldn't drag me down. I knew I had like a drive to succeed. And so there's just no way I could let all of the things that were in my background be the things that just dragged me down and stopped me from achieving things. So reframing was a huge part. Reframing really is just taking all the things that happen, like, oh, I'm not worthy, I must be ugly, I'm not important, I'm not, like, all the things that the backstory put in our heads, the irrational thoughts is what I say, and then replace them with something that's a little bit more positive or uplifting, that moves us forward, that helps us focus on something bigger than ourselves, so we can get out of our own way, because we often just really drown in the day-to-day of our own way. And so I can even coach my own kids on this. I'm just like, I like this thing, I know this thing's happening, I know it, and I know it hurts. And then I've been in similar situations. And here's what I'm going to tell you to do. Like, find the bullseye, find the thing that you can focus on that's out in the distance. So it's not right in front of your eyes. It's out there, like in the distance, let's say, something you can focus on that's forward thinking. And it's a thing that just gets you up out of bed. It's a thing that can help you jump over all the craziness in your life and just keeps you motivated. It could be anything. It could be anything for anybody. For me, it was to be the voice for the voiceless. And specifically, it was about making sure that people at work feel heard, and that they feel like they're important and they're valued. And that absolutely translated in for my personal life. And it was a mission of mine that became a mission that was bigger than me. Because now it's like, it's no longer about like that backstory that's like way years in front of me, but now it's like, wow, a lot of people need that kind of advocacy. No one quite advocated for me, but I can choose to advocate for other people who in similar situations. And so I just chose to make that more workplace focused. So I think those are some of the things. I think that the therapy is, and I go in and out of that. That's not something I'm doing like every day or even every week, but I go in and out of wanting to go do that, need some help working through some things. And then I would say that the biggest thing is just, I'm constantly working on mindset. And I'm also, self-care is another one. I'm constantly saying, like, what do I do? Like, I start my day off on me, not on my kids. I have 4 kids again. And I start my day off on me with like working out and eating a certain breakfast. Like, I do certain things and I start my day at a certain time, and it's all for me, because I know I can't fill other people up. I can't be a good listener. I can't care for others. I can't recognize and appreciate the value of others if I don't do the same for me. Number one, I don't give my kids permission to do that. And number 2, I'm too exhausted to do it for them. So, yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing. And I love the tool, the strategy that you're providing your own children about finding the bullseye, creating some distance there. I think that's something that we can all apply. It's ironic not knowing that we were going to necessarily go in this direction today. This morning, I posted about good leaders have to start by leading themselves. And I talked about self-care and the things that we need to do to be able to show up as our best selves, to be able to show up as an empowered leader. Otherwise, well, I mean, it's the axiom about the oxygen
Oh
mask, right?
yeah,
We have to take care of us before we can take care of others effectively. So it's
absolutely.
interesting. Yeah. So it's interesting that you went down that path a bit. And, speaking of reframing, I think about, as you were sharing that, it made me think about self-awareness because we don't know what we don't know. So if we don't have that self-awareness to recognize what those storylines that we're telling ourselves, we continue to get stuck, right? So
Hmm.
having, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a coach, whether it's, someone else who's a
Yep.
trusted advisor that can help you identify those things, that sees and recognizes them and can hold a mirror up to you. So then you can begin to do the work to
Yep.
move forward. That always seems to be a very powerful step in the right direction.
And I think too, sometimes people say, well, you really have to. I was on a podcast the other day and the person was a therapist. And I say to myself, sometimes you work through things, it's not like one instance. So you work through things here, then you go about your life and you work through things here. And so not everything is linear. And sometimes there's more of a need to work through things depending on something you're facing, I guess. And so, like, for example, my father passed away at the end of last year, and then they're like, oh, have you properly mourned? I'm like, well, we're kind of estranged. And I'm actually trying to work through the complexity of our relationships. And since we hadn't seen each other for 20 years. So I'm trying to do that. And I'm kind of doing that. And then I'm going to go do that with a therapist for a little bit. And then I'm going to do it on my own. So I think kind of like everything in life is for a season, is like a season, right? And I think if we feel like everything has to be done, like I do this now, then I stop this thing, then I go do this thing. And sometimes just things intertwine and life is complex and we are messy as humans. And that is perfectly fine. At least by me
Abs-
it is.
I'm right there with you. I would agree. I mean, this is really all part of the journey that we all experience. And part of that journey is learning forgiveness, right? It's
Hmm.
learning about
Yep.
forgiveness. And that starts with forgiving ourselves, right?
Yep.
So we can then forgive others as
Yes.
well. So it's a really interesting process to go through. So again, I appreciate you sharing a little bit about that as well. So you had posted recently that your one word for 2023 is presence. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what does presence mean to you? Why did you choose that particular word? And what are some of the things that you're doing specifically now to be more present?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting how that word comes up, and at the same time, I mean, my book I wrote in 2021 was The Art of Caring Leadership, which had presence really embedded in all the things. It was like being available and accessible to your team, listening to your team, really showing them that they're valued, and you can't even know or do any of those things if you aren't present. So I think presence really is as it sounds. Am I in 20 places at one time, or am I here with Jay? Am I looking at my cell phone? Is my screen up when I'm talking to my three kids? Is my husband's talking to me? I'm looking down at my phone. I'm at work? My team's trying to get a hold of me. The door's half open. I'm on the computer. I'm listening to them. My phone rings. I talk to them, and the person's all standing there. Do I have? Here's a story that I think exhibits it perfectly. I'll never ever forget it. I didn't experience it. It's a story that was passed down, and it's about Mary Kay Ash, Mary Kay Cosmetics, Mary Kay Ash, the founder. So she had this way about her, period. She was known for having full presence to people. So there's a story of one time there was a conference, and there's thousands of women at these conferences, and one consultant was talking to her, and there was a line of 1,000 other consultants like waiting behind that consultant to chat with her. And the people behind and that person recalled like feeling like the most important person in the world, on the planet, for Mary Kay Ash in that moment, irrespective of a line of 1,000 people. Like most of us would get so flustered, our eyes would shift around, we'd be wondering what's next. And she didn't do that. And am I there? No, I'm not. I'm not there. Am I getting there or trying to get there? Absolutely. Like it's a constant, every day, a journey of trying to get and be more like that, because I do believe that listening is the biggest gift we give to somebody. And that our presence, being there like right front and center with none other distractions around us, and really truly seeing them is like, there's just nothing that tops it. Nothing. In fact, if you've ever been on the receiving end of a person who does that and has that gift, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know exactly how it feels. And I aim to be that person.
I love that story. That's a great role model, a great person, an amazing story to begin with, right? But an amazing person to look to as an influence, look to as inspiration, and to also look at how can I consistently improve to get closer to the way that she was able to make others feel. And you are so right that when you come in contact with that person, when you're with someone else who is somehow able to provide you their undivided attention, that's able to be present in that moment, and their focus is 100% on you, you see it, you feel it, you just sense it, right? There's not only the visual aspect of it, not only the eyes, it's the entire body language, and it's the energy that that person is giving off. It really is an amazing feeling. And like you, when I'm around someone like that, I'm inspired by that, and that pushes me to be a better person myself. That pushes me to want to raise my game so I can be a better listener, so I can be someone who can make someone else feel that same way.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
interesting, because as I think about that, wanting to be that person, and then your kind of tactical request of me too, which is like, how do we do that? And it almost goes back to what I was talking about on the resilience front of overcoming front, is if my bullseye that I'm focusing on is the desire to make people feel heard, valued, important, respected, understood, all the things that make them feel positive after they've interacted with me, to feel like they were so like I was just so important to them right in the moment. If that's like my bullseye, well, then like anything else that's in the way, so that would be like my cell phone, this laptop lid, the people who walk into the room, the people who go by your office when you see them because there's no shade in the window. Those are all the people that get in the way between you and that bullseye, achieving that bullseye. So it's figuring out for yourself, how do you minimize that, and what like rules or things you can, guardrails you can put into place that minimize that for you. So here's an example of what I've tried to do. And am I perfect at it? Because I'm going to say what I've tried to do. You say try, you hear try, right? Try. I write about it, I speak about it, I'm not perfect at it. So my 3 boys come in here, and this is not a workplace example, but it is an example. So my 3 boys that are still home, they come in like around, if one drives the other 2, they all come in at one time, and I'm right at this table, and they just start lining the table, and one goes, and then this, and oh my gosh, the coach was this, and then this, and they're just like, and I'm like, oh yeah, and maybe my eyes start to cross, my head gets woozy, and of course at the whole same time the screen is up, and usually my phone is like right here on the side, and so it might buzz. This is the way it was before I made an intention, before I sent the intention to be more present. So I'd say, oh yeah, oh gosh, really, what, yeah, whoosh, what, and I would do that. Okay. So now if they come loading in, because I know I have an inclination to want to look at the buzzes, I will just set this laptop lid down that I'm looking at now. And I will move the phone and turn it upside down and move it like in a place where I can't hear the buzz as much. So like on the chair that's cushioned. And then what I've told them each is that they all cannot talk at the same time. So, and I'll say, shush, shush. I'm talking to just you, Dominic. So I just want it. And so I just do this. And the others are like waiting their turn, like anticipating their turn. And I'm just like, and so I'm trying to emulate what I will remember until I die, the Mary Kay Ash way. And I try to do it. And then when they're done, like I'll look and I'll be like, okay, like, is that like, did you want to tell me? Is there something you want me to do? Like, let me know. And then if they're like, no, I'm good, Mom. Okay. Then I move over. Okay, Mateo, what do you think now? So I try to go like one by one, and I do that, but it's like, it's the level of intentionality is crazy. It's a huge amount of intentionality that you have to put into it.
You know, I think that's brilliant though. And I love the fact that you set that intention. I think today, because we're so hyper connected, there's so many distractions, so many ways that try to keep us from staying present, right? Our attention's being pulled in 1,000 different directions, whether it's children, whether it's social media, whether it's the cell phone calls, texting, whatever it happens to be. And like you, I am working. I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm making progress. But I'm working every day at getting better at shutting everything off, setting that intention. So when my wife, as an example, in the evening, if we're having a conversation or perhaps we're both reading and she wants to share something with me, the moment that she tries to share something about what she's reading or something that happened during the day, I stop, I take a pause, I breathe, and I just tune in to her, almost like a radio receiver. I am really trying to eliminate every other distraction that I can. And you made the point about cell phones, right? And moving that out of the way. Today, I would tell you that in the evening, when it's our time together, the cell phone rarely, once in a while, but the cell phone rarely is even in that room today.
Nice.
It just is not, because it's too easy, right? It's that need for dopamine. We keep hearing that buzz, and we're constantly looking at it, and it will, as you know, it will have an impact on your ability to engage with others, to be fully present, and to listen intently. We can't listen if we're being pulled in 10 other directions. I've never, let me say this, that's never worked for me.
It doesn't work for anybody. Sorry. So anybody's listening going, it works for me. Oh, heck no. Nope. You're fooling yourself. Doesn't work for any of us. So
exactly.
If you want someone to make you feel important, to be present for you, you have to reciprocate. You can't expect a kind of higher, level of expectations for someone else, and then you just kind of go at it halfway. We all just have to be all in on this listening.
Absolutely. Thing. Set the intention, right?
Mm-hmm.
Love that. So we briefly touched on this, but I want to go a little bit deeper. The power of caring leadership. So your second book was The Art of Caring Leadership. And in that book, you provided a 9-step framework for being able to develop and cultivate your caring leadership skills. So can you just very briefly touch on maybe 3 or 4 of the steps in that framework, and where we can maybe give some examples to our audience? And obviously, I would encourage everyone to go out and buy a copy of this book, which we're going to link to in the show notes. But I would love it if you could maybe pull back the curtain a little bit and share some of that framework with us.
Yeah. Well, I got to that framework after doing a couple different sources of research. So one was about reviewing personally over 30,000 employee surveys and facilitating a little over 100 employee focus groups myself for clients of mine who were looking to get to the truth of the matter of what their team members wanted and why. Also interviewing about 180 leaders at that point on my podcast, Leadership at Heart. And what I was looking for, I knew when I was bringing people in that already had a little bit more emotional intelligence. They already showed and expressed some of the care that I was thinking of. But they also had a lot of vulnerability. They were willing to share times when they weren't so great. So as I got to maybe episode 25 of that, I'm like, oh my gosh, these people are so brilliant. They're brilliant, not in their perfection. They were brilliant in how they had gone through some of the fire of leadership and had come out the other end in their enlightenment. And I have got to get this in a book. So as I paired both those sources of research together, that's how I came up with The Art of Caring Leadership. So the 9 steps were like a synthesis of all of the things that employees wanted, that I read in comments, and the people who exhibited them, and sometimes how they failed, and all of those things. That's really what it was. Okay. The 9 behaviors. So I would say the first one you already totally led onto, Jay, and that was self-leadership. We cannot lead people if we don't lead ourselves. We cannot give what we do not have. And so self-leadership it was the biggest chapter. It had multiple components to it based upon all the people I'd spoken to. How do they lead themselves? What do they do? Most people think self-leadership is only self-care. Self-care is a component of that. Self-care doesn't just look like one thing to one person, like going to work out or eating well. It could be so many other things like therapy, meditation, gardening. So many things, swimming, whatever. But there's also these components of congruency, being congruent with what it is you say that you value. And so you say you have an open door policy. If your door's in fact open, is your laptop screen up, and are you on your phone and you're answering the phone and talking to 5 other people? Because really, are you accessible if you have the multitasking mindset when you're listening? And then another thing is recognizing people. So making them feel important is one. And that is like, recognizing people, having, making sure that you're accessible, make sure you spend one-on-one time with your people so that they know that you are, that they're important in and of themselves, that you care for them as people, as humans, and not just because they're a means to your end of the projects and things you want to get accomplished. Helping them become more resilient is one of them, which is, why I spoke a little bit about what that was earlier on reframing and self-care and just those types of things, is another one. And then let's say one other would be whole person leadership. That's another really important one. That's just kind of saying, I'm taking in all of my team members, all of them, meaning home, work, whatever the dimensions of and their identities are, I'm taking it all in, whether I agree or not, I'm taking it all in, and I'm trying to meet them where they're at. In any moment that they need me for whatever purpose. So those are kind of the frameworks, but it's like, again, it was interesting. I think I started off maybe 15, and it's like, nope, I got down to 12. And I'm like, no, 10. And I'm like, dang it, I feel like these two are too aligned. And then if I got these are like more independent. I think these are more independent enough that these would be the ones, So it's just funny, the process that it's actually just my process anyway. I tend to do everything with like any book or any talk, I start really wide and then I just go narrow, 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 narrow. And I'm like, oh, okay. Kind of like the TEDx talks. It's like, oh, it's like a point on the tip of a pin, and that's the point I'm going to land on.
I love that. So I'm curious of that 9-step framework. Are there any of those steps in particular that is more challenging for you specifically that you continue to work on?
Yeah. Well, listening is one of those. So that's one. And the other one is empowering them to do great work. That's another thing. Because I do empower, but because I'm as a entrepreneur, I'm somebody who I feel like I want to have more control. So sometimes I'll have like a tendency to go, did you do that thing that you're going to be doing? Okay, I just want to make sure you do that thing. I saw you did a thing, but you didn't do it like we talked about. Like, I'll do that. So that's a thing where I struggle with empowerment. I think I lean more towards being an empowering leader generally, but it is still I'm an work in progress when it comes to that.
So when that happens, when you're having a conversation with someone within your business and you ask that type of question, do you catch it immediately, or is it after the fact that you're like, oh, you know what, there it goes again?
But sometimes I mostly know when I'm doing it. So here's the issue with most of the change. Like a lot of times it's like there's a self-awareness thing of knowing you're doing it. And then there's this like social awareness thing of figuring out the impact to others. And then just like making it the desire to like change that thing and sticking with it. So I just say it's like the awareness that there's an issue, the desire to change it, and then the stamina to see it through. Those are kind of the three-part framework for change. And so for me, it's like, oh, I'm highly aware. Like when I'm doing it, I'm like, yep, I know I did that and I should have done that. And the idea is, will I do it again? Or will I commit to not doing it again? Like it's like in everything in life. Am I going to commit to not do that thing, be that person, whatever it is? And so it depends on what's happening. Here's what I found: much more empowering when I'm not hyper stressed and have 5,000 projects going on. If I have a lot of projects and the deadlines are approaching and it's a personal goal or personal goals of mine, then I tend to lean in more on, is that done? Did you get it done? Just want to make sure it's done. So I tend to do a little bit more. I have a micromanagement tendency when things get too super nuts and off the rails. So obviously the way to control that is to make sure you don't have things getting super nuts and off the rails, and that things are being contained and that expectations are set up front so that people know, what the timelines are, that they're holding themselves to it. And if they don't, if with all of us, if we aren't accountable to ourselves first and we can't be accountable for the jobs we're doing, then we have to, figure out what we're going to do differently, or someone else is going to help us figure out what to do differently. Right.
Absolutely.
So,
I feel you on that. If I were to talk to some of your team members right now, and I were to ask them 2 questions. Number 1, what type of leader is Heather? And the second question is, how would you describe Heather on her best day / most challenging day? How do you think they would respond?
As I ask one of these questions on my podcast, I always love this. I think that the first one would probably be she's an inspiring leader who has a vision and has a lot on her plate. Like those would probably be like the initial things they would say. On the best day, they would be like she's super uplifting, she's like super supportive. She demonstrates care, so she's like really congruent. And on the worst day, she has a great heart and she's got too much on her plate, so overextended, and so then she starts to get a little bit like ruffled.
Interesting.
Mhm.
And how does that make you feel?
Sorry, I only laugh. Like I told you, just like the other day, I was being interviewed by a podcast or by a therapist, so that just made me. You said that, it made me think of that again. How does it make me feel? I mean, it's real. If I am not anything, I am absolutely real. So I'm not afraid to admit my mistakes. And in fact, I tell them to tell me when I'm off course. In fact, I get mad if they haven't corrected my thinking. Like I expect them to correct my thinking, and I love people who aren't yes people on my team. So I hire people and I want people on there. And if they're going to be people who don't counter against me and then later go, well, you should have done this way. And I'm like, wait. I needed you to stop me from thinking a certain way. Like, just tell me, really? And I have one who's like, she's not easily intimidatable, let's say. And she'll say, really? Why? And sometimes I'll fight her on it, but most times I don't. Most times it's like, nope, you're right. That's stupid.
Well, good for you
And she
for
knows that. I mean, yeah, she knows that. She'll tell me.
wonderful. I think that's a great way to build confidence in your team, asking for feedback and creating an open culture where we do encourage pushing back. If you've got a better idea, a better way of doing things, if you don't agree with this
Yep.
particular idea, let's talk about it. Tell me the
Yep.
reasons why. And
Yep.
keeping an open mind and open eyes. I think that's a wonderful way to operate. So I want to talk for a moment or two about your brand new book, which is The Art of Active Listening: How People at Work Feel Heard, Valued, and Understood. And like in your second book, where you offer a framework with multiple steps, in this book, you offer a 5-step framework for listening successfully and taking action on what you're hearing. I love that, because as we know, we can have all the great information, we can learn, we can absorb new information, but if we don't take action on it, then we are missing the most significant component. So let's talk about that framework. You list off: recognize the unsaid, seek to understand, decode, act, and close the loop. Now, can you give us a bit of insight on each of those 5 steps?
Yeah, I mean, so recognize the unsaid really is, well, the idea of most of us aren't paying attention to what is happening in our environment. So we are just so dang busy, not just leaders, but just many of us are so busy. We're not stopping to go, why are those people quiet? Or, I just heard them laughing when I walked in the room, everybody got quiet. Or, like just the awareness of what's happening there that's not being spoken. And then the other thing is, why is it not being spoken? Does it have something to do with me? Do I create fear in people or a lack of safety around people? So those are the kind of questions we ask ourselves, and that recognize the unsaid before we even get to leaning into the seeking to understand, which is what most people think of as listening. Most people think of listening as the leaning in, the shaking the head, the repeating back, the reflective part of it, which it is a very critical part of listening. But you can't go into seeking, right, if you go into it with a get mindset. Like, I'm going in it to get something. So I want to talk to Jay so I can see how I can get more business from Jay. I want to talk to Jay so I can see how I can make sure he doesn't leave to the employer that I know who he's interviewing with. That's why I want to talk to Jay. So all of it is about like get, which is kind of our culture. What can I get from it? And instead looking at it, and I'm going to say this because I have to say this. Like I said, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a driven person. I want to get things. I want to have more revenues. I want to achieve things. I understand the get desire. But if I go into the interaction with the get, people are going to sense the get. They're going to know the get. They're not going to feel heard, valued, and understood. So I have to go with the giving mindset. I have to say, how am I serving the person just by my presence? How do I serve them just by hearing them out and seeing them for what it is that's inside of them? There's something they need from me. There's something they want to tell me. How do I go into it for that? Because if I go into it with that first, I'm not saying I don't want to get something out of it. So I don't want the listeners to say, well, Heather, that's just the most naive Pollyanna thing I've ever heard. We all want to get stuff. I get it. But my main primary thing needs to be get to the bottom of what I can do to improve or serve the person in front of me, some way, shape, or form. If I do that, it's everything else is going to spill from it anyway. So if I do that, I create more loyalty and I endear them to me because I know I care for them. What are they going to do for me? For example, if I am a manager, if I am a salesperson, if I'm whatever those things, what do you think will happen next? But if I go into it just for that, like I'm not going to go into it just to impress you that I'm listening either. I have to really want to listen to you. I have to really want to hear you and see you. And this is a problem because some people don't actually want that. So we just have to ask ourselves, as we go into, that's what it is. After seeking, it's the decoding phase. And that is really just saying, okay, after I've taken in all that I've heard, am I going to go right to action or am I going to process what's happening? Am I going to research what it is they're saying? Do I need to validate the truth? Do I need to see if the issue is bigger or smaller than what they're saying? What do I need to do? I need to take the time. I need to reflect. I need to take the time. Most people don't do that. This is a step that most people don't do. They don't reflect. They go, I heard this pain. Most people come at it from a good place of heart. They're like, they want to help people. But we rush to the action. And often the action isn't equal, isn't aligned. The action doesn't have the impact that we intend or that they wanted. Sometimes they didn't want us to do one dang thing. They just want us to be seeing them. The next thing is action. So action is action.
I want to take a pause for one moment because I just want to interject and say that decode, that's definitely an area that I fall short. I think back on many of the interactions that I have, and I like to think that I'm an active listener, and I know that there are many areas that I can improve upon. But that one step right there, I know for a fact right now that I go from listening, asking questions to taking action.
And it's from a good place, though. I mean, the good thing is, like, it is nothing to beat yourself over the head with. Like, don't get irritated with yourself, because in the end, you're doing it from a place of good-heartedness, care. It's just that my question would be, how much more care would you impart upon them? How much more importance would they feel if you let them know that you're going to take some time to process? You're going to let them know you're going to take some time to research. You're going to let them know you're going to talk to the team. You're going to make sure it's the best response. And then when you come back to them to say, we've decided to take action, what you said was right. And actually was more right than you think after I've talked to this person and that person and done this and this and that. So you take the action. You take action based upon, again, a combination of things. But I think the key is making sure that you've done that decoding first to make sure the action is right. And the action really is it's the cross and the T. It's not quite at the dot on the I. The next step is, but it's the cross and the T. So it says to the person, I use my voice, and this person thought my voice was important enough to do something about it. They didn't just hear my voice and then walk away, and then that was the end of it. So it is the cross on the T of listening. It is, it gets us so close to being almost there until we reach the next step, which is closing the loop. And the closing the loop really is, it is the dot on the I. So you've crossed the T with action, you've dotted the I with closing the loop. And that is because when we think about, most of the times, you listen to the person, so you lean in, you seek to understand. You might be a person who actually went to do a little research or talk to a coworker or whatever. You might have actually done some decoding. You go back to me, say, and you act. Okay, so you take the action. You go back to them after that and go, oh my gosh, Jay, that feedback, I wasn't sure it was an issue until I went and looked, and it was. I want to thank you, number one, for the feedback, because you just helped us get better, or helped me get better as a result. but here's what I want to tell you. Here's what we think we're going to do about it. Or here's what we've done about it. Or we're thinking about doing this. And so what do you think? Okay, now great. Well, we're going to go do that thing. And then in a month, I might come back to you and I'm going to see how it goes. Then come back to you in a month. And I say, oh my gosh, we did this, we did that. It was because you gave us that feedback. I think things are going well. What do you think, Jay? Okay, so in that interaction, is Jay feeling kind of important?
Yes.
Or is Jay feeling heard? Or are you feeling like I understood you because of the action I took and how I connected that dot for you? I closed the loop on what you originally told me. So that's where that cycle starts and ends, and it continues to cycle over again. Most of us don't do step 3 or step 5. Most of us don't close the loop. Most of us don't decode. A lot of us don't do the recognize the unsaid. Most of us seek pretty dang well. We've learned through books and stuff that the seeking part, most of us, maybe not the mindset portion, but at least the tactical side of listening, leaning in, shaking head, reflecting, repeating back, those kinds of things, which is great. And I do talk about that in the book. It's important to know the tactics. But if you don't start off with the right mindset, and then you don't start to say, how do we wrap this in a bow for the person who originally either told us or didn't tell us? They may initially showed us. So, and here's an example. See, like the one I said where I walk up to the door and I hear laughter and I go into the room and the laughter stops. It's like, wait a second. What happened? I want to go further. So if I'm a leader, I'm gonna be like, I'm not going to say this there in the room. What just happened? Why'd you guys all stop? I'm not going to say that because they're going to be like, what do you mean? Da, 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 da. But I would want to do kind of like you're doing, coffee talks, like round tables, or like, let's do some, like go bowling. Let's just do some stuff. Let's figure out. And then like in my own way, start to figure out what it might have been. Maybe it was just they were closed off. You're closed off. They then became closed off. The safe space wasn't created. And then you have to ask yourself, how do you create that? And it's not just people who have titles. There's people who have certain personalities that just shut everybody down, just shut people down. It's just the way their personality is. And so it's just, okay, I recognize that. And is it always somebody blaming somebody else? Or can I look inward and say, is there a role I play here? Do I play a role? So that's what all this listening thing is. And it's for everybody at work. This book right here is about everyone at work. It's not just about those with titles. It's about how anybody at work can listen to anybody else, whether it's internal and external. So it's those on sales, listening to prospects, those of customer experience, listening to customers, those listening to leaders, listening to the executive team, listening to the board. It's just anybody listening inside. It's just a workplace listening book. So whoever's listening right now, guess what? It applies to you.
Absolutely. Well, this is so powerful and so relevant. So for all of you that are watching and listening right now, I would first advise you to go back and re-listen to not only the entire episode, but certainly the past several minutes while we were talking about the art of active listening and going through this framework. But then most importantly is to pick up a copy of the book where you'll go into much more detail, where you'll come away with the tools, the strategies, what you need to become an active listener and see change within your organization. Obviously, we'll provide links to that in the show notes as well. So you touched on this, but I just want to ask you a question around nonverbal cues. So you mentioned about the head nod and so forth. How important are nonverbal cues when it comes to active listening?
Yeah. And those show up when I say like recognize the unsaid. Nonverbal cues are a big part of that. Reading between the lines is a part of that. So and what are some of the cues and like the body language and stuff. Like I remember I was doing an online training during the pandemic. I want to say it was maybe like 2020. I was law enforcement, and I was training on emotional intelligence alongside a diversity and inclusion kind of sub message with a partner of mine. And so in the room, like everybody was leaning on, but I saw this one gentleman like this, like he was just leaning back, arms crossed, and just like totally not receptive. So as I was talking about nonverbal cues in the emotional intelligence space, I immediately see him kind of sit up and his arms uncrossed. He's not I don't know if he thinks I'm talking about him but he's listening to me because he see his body language completely change. But I said, well, you know what that says? And if somebody's like, sitting this and like arms crossed, it's like they're not really receptive to the message. Maybe they don't agree with your message. Maybe there's just all these things. And then you just see him kind of like get up, take his so I think it's paying attention to that. And people say, well, now we're in the virtual world, you can't see it as much. Well, I think it just requires that we have even more presence, which is how we started we started this conversation, that we were even more present to pay attention to the micro expressions. And we can't see, like right now, you can't see kind of below the chest line. So you can't see what my legs or my arms are doing. But you can see enough. You can see I'm leaning in. And while I'm not looking at the camera, because for me, that's a little forced, particularly in this long scenario where we're sitting for an hour and just to go like this,
Yeah.
I actually want to see Jay's face. I actually think he can see I'm super curious about his face. So I'm actually looking at his face just actually on the screen versus going, which makes you then see my eyes. So if I need to deliver a message to you that is like, let's say I'm calling you in the car, but like I'm actually helping you course correct something that you've done. I'm holding you accountable to something that went wrong. Then I may be right here, and I may kind of go closer and just say, you understand how that is, right? You understand that. But in the end, when I'm just having a conversation and I want to hear him, I'm literally looking at his face. I don't want to look at the camera. I want to see Jay's face. So then Jay would know that. And I think those are the things we can still do virtually. Let's stop discounting and making excuses for how we can't listen on Zoom. I think we can listen you just have to clear the fray. You have to commit to presence.
You are so correct on that. Well, thank you for sharing that. And before I ask my final question, I would love it if you would give our audience a challenge, something you would like them to do for themselves.
I would say for the next 5 days at least, I would say try to center yourself for just 5 minutes in the day with the intention, almost like meditating on this intention of being more present. So like today, I'm going to make sure the phone is in a totally different room when my kids are around. Or today, when my team member comes in the office, I'm going to take the phone and put it on the opposite side or whatever that thing is. But just like 5 minutes, start the day kind of really centering yourself on this intent to be present. That would be the challenge I would say to do.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that with everyone. And here is my final question to you. So, what is one of the greatest gifts that life has given you that you didn't realize at the time?
Well, I think it kind of goes to the very beginning, which is the exclusion that happened to me early on gave me the gift today to truly see others and to be there for others and to have a warmth about my desire to know and be with them and care for them. Came from the not so good stuff. Wouldn't have expected that.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. And Heather, thank you so very much for bringing your warmth, bringing your talent, your knowledge, your experience, your vulnerability, and for sharing so much with our audience today. I've truly enjoyed the conversation, and I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Grateful for you too. It's been awesome, Jay.
Well, likewise. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. And please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and we would love it if you would leave us a review. Let us know what you thought about this particular episode with Heather. That would be greatly appreciated. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com and click on podcasts. And until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you order a copy of The Art of Active Listening. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.
Jay Scherr,
Jay Scherr, business consultant.
Jay Scherr Business Consulting.